This magnificent building is Norwich Cathedral, and which dates back to the 13th century. A lot of the work which we see around us, although in fact the cathedral itself has been on this site for, well, when was it founded?
1066, it's William the Conqueror came over.
So it's pretty ancient in its origins. What we see in front of us, in fact, was the part where the normal people would come and worship or whatever, and here the priest would stand, and there used to be what was called a rood screen in front of us, and that would separate the people who were in front from what was here behind. And what we had here behind, in the place I'm standing now, we had two shrines. One which once stood here was to Thomas à Becket. Thomas à Becket was murdered by Henry II in 1170. It's the scene where Henry shouts, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" And 4 knights took him at his word, and he was killed in Canterbury, wasn't it? Canterbury, yes. And then, so he very much a symbol of martyrdom. But on this site we have something else which is the effects of which have gone into more recent times. He used to be a shrine for William of Norwich, who in 1144 was killed, and his death was blamed on the local Jewish population. This was the beginning of the blood libel, which in itself has been responsible for terrible suffering for probably tens, if not more, tens of thousands of people since then, in pogroms and in killings otherwise. That the idea that Jews need Christian blood to make matzah out of at Passover and at other times, despite the fact it's very clearly written in the Bible that this to use blood at all of any type.
In the book of Leviticus.
Leviticus, yes.
That Jewish people do not use blood in food. It's fully drained.
Yeah.
And in the old days of Israel, it would have been buried in earth.
Yes, and not only that, the only place that blood could be shown was in the temple in Jerusalem, where blood goes out the floor, which was destroyed in 70 CE.
Yes, so, no longer exists anymore.
So I have with me Michael Chandler, who is has written a book on the history of Norwich, and would like to write a book on the blood libel. And Michael, what can you tell us about this?
Well, what we're going to do, we're going to go into this area here.
Yeah.
And this is a small little place within the church, which is called the Chapel of the Holy Innocents.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about William of Norwich, and let the viewers know a little bit about him. William was born in 1132 in Haveringland Estate, which is just outside Norwich. His mother's name was Alviva, and his dad's name was Wenston. His grandfather was Woolard the priest. Now, in 1132, when he was born, his mother had this dream of 12 fins on a fish with blood. And her father translated the dream to say that when your son is 12, he will be holy and with the Lord. Now, a lot of people prophesised dreams in the old days and took them for being reality. Now, as William grew up, he became a skinner. And some of his best customers were of the Jewish population of Norwich, which was around 500 at the time. Now, unfortunately, when William was 12, he was brutally murdered. And as a result of this, the family needed to know who had killed their son. Who could they blame? They blamed the Jewish race of Norwich. And a synod took place in this actual cathedral, when it was called Norwich Church. And you had Prior Elias and Donna Mia, who was the prior of St Pancras. And they got together to ask people lots of questions about how William was actually murdered. The story goes that when he was a skinner, he came out from work one day and was approached by a man who said, "I would like you to come and work for the Archdeacon of Norwich in his kitchen." William said, "I've got to ask my mother for permission for this." And they went to see the mother. She was a little bit apprehensive as she wanted her son to continue being a skinner. But money exchanged hands. And she said to her son, "You go with my blessing, and become the chef or the cook or kitchen, whatever it is, to the archdeacon. That night, William was murdered in Thorpewood. Now, in the synod, there was discussions about that the Jews had killed William. But Prior Elias never believed this. Now we come on to a man called Thomas of Monmouth, who spent 28 years looking into the death of William and miracles. And he wrote a book which disappeared for hundreds of years and came back in 1908. Now, the court case went on for quite some time, and it even brought I think it was King Stephen, down to Norwich to listen to the trial, and the case was put on hold. Hundreds of Jews were murdered in their houses and on the streets of Norwich, and the story became known as blood libel. And as you correctly said before, Jewish people were accused of killing Christian boys and using their blood to make matzah. And anyone that understands anything on Jewish law will know that Jews do not eat blood. Blood libel has continued throughout time. But we do know that two popes in the 12th century wrote letters saying the Jews were not guilty for the murder of William. Even Hitler used the blood libel against the Jews. Now what we've got here is, as I said, we're in the Chapel of the Holy Innocents, and it tells you a little bit about William of Norwich, but there's a very moving prayer which was found on a piece of wrapping paper in Ravensbrück, which was the largest of the concentration camps for women in Nazi Germany. And if possible, I'd like to read the poem. O Lord, remember not only the men and women of goodwill, but also those of ill will. But do not remember all the suffering they have inflicted upon us. Remember the fruits we have brought. Thanks to this suffering, our commandship, our loyalty and humility, the courage, the generosity, the greatness of heart, which has grown out of this. And when they came to judgment, let all the fruits that we have borne be their forgiveness. Amen. Thank you.